Hey everyone, we have Dana Dunford on from Hemlane today, and I'm bringing you on a tool that I use in my own portfolio, and I wanted to have her come on and tell us all about what Hemlane has to offer and how to find good tenants. Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard, Dana.
Great. Thanks so much, Paul, for having me today. It's such a pleasure. And I'm happy to hear that you're using Hemlane and grew your portfolio so quickly. So hopefully others can learn from that.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about Hemlane and how you got started and what your customer, like your focus is.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because a lot of companies, when they start startups, they always say a startup is and very similar to like when you build your real estate portfolio. It should be a model, not a plan. And what I mean by that is like corporations, if you're in the corporate world, you have a business plan. It takes you, a month to create it and then 12 months to actually execute on it. In a startup, it needs to be much more of a model. You're testing things, you're constantly iterating, and that business plan you had from day one is not what you have in the future, right? And I think very similarly, real estate investors do that because you're saying, great, what works? House hacking. Okay, great. Now, should I do long term rentals? Should I do short term rentals? All of that kind of stuff goes into it. So, anyway, the reason I bring that up is with Hemlane, it was still a business model, but the vision has stayed very much the same. Our go to market changed of how we do it, but like knowing what that pain point was and how to solve real estate investors pain point, still very much to this day the same thing that we had in the vision. So when we started Hemlane, and the concept really started actually in 2015, so a long time ago, 9 years ago, we basically looked at the market and said, and we're real estate investors ourselves. There's two different ways to manage your properties. One is do it yourself, and the other is a traditional property manager. And what we found really, really interesting is unlike buy sell, when you buy a property, like I think it's 98%, don't quote me on that number, but majority of people use an agent to do it. What's really interesting about property management is 72% self manage. So 72% do not use a property manager at all. But then when you talk to them, they all complain about it. Their tenants complain about it. Their tenants are like, they're not responding to me fast enough. This isn't getting done, et cetera. And so the question was like, hey, if you layer technology onto the existing industry, we know that doesn't work. Some examples of that would be like Taxi Magic. Taxi Magic took taxi companies and put technology on top. And of course, Uber just reinvented it, where it's like, great, there's a lot of people with cars sitting there idle. Let's have them become the taxi drivers, right? And so for us, it was very much of don't layer technology onto the existing industry, create something totally different. And so that's where we came up with this alternative hybrid model where we said, great, we're going to have a platform. You can get software, it's going to automate most of what you do, Paul, and then you're going to tack on services. So if you need repair coordination, you can get that. If you need rent defense, which is like, hey, your tenant hasn't paid rent on time, you can get that. You need showings, great, we can get you an agent, or you could use self-guided tour technology. And so really the concept was make it a plug and play. And that's actually where like the two hexagons in Hemlane and the company are like merging together. It's supposed to be this plug and play where you can pick and choose what you want. And so that concept has stayed the same of saying, hey, how do we make property management and elevate the industry in a traditional industry where no one's really cared about it and no one's put a lot of thought into innovation? That vision has very much stayed true. And so today we have over 28,000 rentals. It makes us the largest on the property management side doing the services for the small mom and pop. And our goal is just to continue to provide services for not only real estate investors like yourself, but also tenants, because your tenants are your customer. If your customer is happy, they'll stay at the property for longer and not think to go somewhere else. And so that's a little bit about the Hemlane like founding story and what we are. And then of course our kind of go to market and how we did it and how we ensure quality. That was through that business model of constantly A/B testing of saying, hey, Paul, this was back in 2016. We take our early customers and say, hey, we're going to try two different things. Let us know what you like better. And then we would take that and iterate. And now, like in hindsight, it's interesting when all the puzzle pieces are put together. It's like, oh, of course you should build it that way. But back then, it was like very much of an opaque space. And now I see with real estate investors, all of you guys building your portfolio. Obviously, what we're talking about today, Paul, is the most costly expense is a bad tenant. And so, from our perspective, what we're trying to do is make sure you don't make those mistakes and that you don't have to A/B test things to see what works. We have a tried, tested, and true process for that. So hopefully that's a good background of who we are and what we do.
Yeah, definitely. That was great. And I love how you also have like different tiers so that somebody can be more hands-on or less hands-on as much as they want. So
Yep. Yeah.
yeah, that really helps. And really, let's get right into it as far as the biggest expense is a bad tenant. So let's cover some of the ways that you've seen and your platform can help get ahead of that and not put a bad tenant in the property.
Yeah, so there's so many things to think about with tenants, but I always tell sometimes real estate investors get greedy. And actually, where I see the greediest ones are accidental landlords because they think their property is always worth more than it is because they lived in it. So they have some sort of emotional attachment. I always say everything needs to be super objective. And you should not be taking the market and saying, oh my gosh, the market's wrong. And so maybe I should just take this one tenant inquiry. It's like if you only have one tenant inquiry, the market's right, your price too high, right? And
Yeah.
so our goal is to make sure you understand that and that we really help find and place a tenant faster for you. And of course, a qualified tenant. So I want to talk about a couple of things, but before I go into the technology, I want to talk about professional tenants. Professional tenants will try to find DIY landlords. They don't want to work with a property management company. They want to find an owner operator who is brand new to the game to say, great, this person does not know the law as well as me, and I can use the law and twist it in my favor. Examples of that is they put a repair request in on the 31st of the month. And so on the first of the month, they're like, you didn't do this repair. I'm not going to pay rent. They also pay partial rent. They pay like just $1 and then say, you can't evict me because I've paid part of this month's rent. And so all of those types of things, like our RC team, which is our repair coordination team, or how we set up rent collection, is all set up with the best practices and processes in place to avoid that. But then the goal is, how do you screen for them up front and find out, is this tenant going to work? It's all about data, data, and then how do you get the most tenants in? And so, I mean, every state's different on the fair housing side, but how do you get the most tenants in? So you have an objective qualified tenant that you are approving versus I only have one tenant to approve and I have vacancy, so let me just go ahead and accept them. So let me jump in kind of to the technology and how that works. The first thing we do is we help you with advertising. We'll also avoid fair housing. So we use AI to help boost the description and make that better. Things like great family neighborhood, that's a fair housing violation. So that won't be in your listing at all. You won't see us having the AI rate that. We have certain restrictions in place for that type of to catch that type of thing. It's very objective. Then we'll advertise it out. Interestingly enough, we've A/B tested this of how many websites to advertise to, and it's about 12 websites that get you 98% of tenant traffic. So what I mean by that is 98% of tenant eyeballs are on it. We do 15 to get you to that 99.7%. So it's just over 15 listing websites. So we'll shoot it off to these listing websites, and then all the tenant inquiries come into Hemlane. If you're finding that you do not have enough inquiries, you'll get an email from us saying, like, maybe you should reconsider your price. But some of it might also just be you're too restrictive. For example, 50% of tenants have pets, over 50%. So if you're saying, I don't accept pets in my property, you're going to get one of two things. One is 50% fewer leads into your property. Or two, you're going to get someone who comes to your property and says, I don't have a pet. I have an emotional support animal. Here's my fake paperwork that I got online. And by the way, now you can't charge me pet rent. You can't charge me pet deposit. And my emotional support animal is moving in with me. And so there's other things that we highly encourage, like you should accept pets. And like, please read this article on why. to try to just help give you the best advantage of when you go out and advertise your property. You put restrictions on those pets. We kind of walk you through what should and shouldn't be there. Then all of those inquiries from those listing websites come on into Hemlane, and you can respond to the inquiries via messages. All those messages are sent via text message and email. Tenants don't really read emails. You and I do, Paul. We're very good on our emails, but tenants usually don't. So everything is also via text message to them. And then you can set up showings, do pre-qualifications, etc. One of the coolest features that we've launched is self-guided tours. Before I jump into it, Paul, I want to hear what your opinions are, or just like initial thoughts on self-guided tours. Think they're a great idea, or think they're a terrible idea?
I think they could work. You're gonna get, I think, with a lot of the mom and pop landlords not wanting people to be in their property without them there or without somebody showing it. But
Yep.
I think it could be very efficient if done properly. So
And that's a great answer. I would have told you 2 years ago, heck no, don't do self-guided tours. You're going to get a ton of squatters. Your property is going to be destroyed, etc. And then we decided to launch it, and we compared it against the alternative, which was, Paul, you doing the showings yourself or using an agent. And hands down, the quality of the tenants was better, as well as the days on market was reduced by 7 days. So we found we could find and place a tenant faster. But I think, Paul, very much to your point with these self-guided tours that we do, we really wanted to make sure that customers knew, hey, this is a very secure process. So there's a couple of ways we make that much more secure. And then I'll go into the why and why you should do self-guided tours. The first thing is we never advertise self-guided tours. If you go to other websites, I won't list them online, they will say like, self-guided tours, schedule anytime. That's literally just telling a squatter, please come and move into my property, right? It will attract them. On Hemlane, you have no idea with those 28,000 rentals, which ones have self-guided tours and which ones don't. So like, that's the first thing that we do. Then when you go through the process to schedule your tour, we'll go ahead and say, Paul, great, you're scheduling your tour. Just so you know, when you're far enough in and you've objectively qualified for the property, we'll ask you some questions, make sure your income and your credit are over the approved objective criteria. Then we'll say, great, we also just need to do a quick security thing because this is going to be a self-guided tour. And you're going to have to hold your ID up to your face and we'll scan it. We'll make sure you say you are who you are, and then we'll also scan that ID to make sure there's nothing that comes back that may make us question whether or not you should do the self-guided tour. It's not things like speeding tickets. It's more like Paul killed 12 people type of scan there. But anyway, so then we'll go ahead and go through that. And once you're verified, which you see, I think it's like 99% of people get verified and say, yep, we're through it. Then you'll go ahead and show up to your tour. We don't give you a code that works anytime. It just works for your showing. So we'll send that over to you after you confirm you're on site, give us the serial number. We'll go ahead and give you a single use PIN to do those self-guided tours. Now, you're probably wondering, and then we follow up, we'll give you a call right after the showing. So we're doing all of that for you. One of the things we found of how this helps you find and place more qualified tenants is speed to lead. And so what speed to lead is let's just say, Paul, you house hack. Let's just say you've got your property and house hacking property, like another property next door, rent by room. If you don't respond for 2 days, you're out of the office for the weekend, you can't show the property. And I know with some, when it's rent by room, sometimes it's like the pad split model where it's just automatic and you don't see it in advance. But if there is some sort of showing in advance, if you have equally the same properties, and one allows you to see it today and the other makes you wait 3 days, you've already lost that lead. They've already seen the other property, made the decision, put the application in, and gotten approved, even if they're not moving for a couple of days. And so that's why I'm like a huge fan of self-guided tours, helping find and place tenants. All right, great. The next thing I want to bring up to you is with it, things to look out for. So of course we have the full comprehensive application. Then we do the background and credit check. We do the income verification. We do the pay stubs, bank statements, very comprehensive application for them to do. If the person wants to move in tomorrow, you have to question how qualified this person is. Why have they not planned in advance and they're moving right now? There's a lot of questions that are going to go through your head. And so you almost want to make sure that when you're looking at these qualified tenants, that everything just makes sense. Like you kind of put yourself in those shoes, being like, yeah, I'd probably look for a property 30 to 15 days before I need to move, get it signed, etc. And so all of those questions come up. And then you do the past landlord reference checks to really make sure, and we'll do that if you're doing our self-guided tour, technology, et cetera, but really making sure that we're moving things forward and in a delightful way for you, because we'll kind of pick up those signals. So I know I just spoke your ear off, Paul, but hopefully that's helpful and how we help find and place a tenant.
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to get back to emotional support animals. How can people screen and see if some of these documents are faulty?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there's a really strong process you have to do with emotional support animals. First of all, the second that you say that you have a process to verify emotional support animals, um, is someone who doesn't have a real emotional support animal kind of goes like this and trickles out. We've even had it where we've seen it where someone in our system will say, I have emotional support animal. Great. We're going to do verification documents. Actually, just kidding. I'll pay the pet fee.
Yeah.
Like we've even seen it to that point where it's like, okay, you've never had an emotional support animal. And so I think it's really important to look at that. But yeah, so the first thing to do is to get their letter, their emotional support animal letter. You need to make sure and verify. You can look it up online. It's very easy. You can search it. You need to make sure that this is a licensed therapist. There are places online where you can go to get a fake emotional support animal letter, but it's not a verified therapist. And so the first thing you need to do is just verify that. You can also verify, did they write the letter? So you could call that office and say, hey, can you confirm you wrote this letter and that this is verified so it's not forged? But you can't ask anything else. You can't say like, hey, can you let me know what condition they have that they need an emotional support animal? Or tell me more about last time you saw your patient. You can't do any of that. It has to be incredibly objective of like, hey, just calling to verify this letter, just calling to verify your license, or you can look it up. There's a license lookup tool online. So that's the biggest thing of verifying emotional support animals, is just making sure that that's verified. Once you have that verified, you can't charge pet rent, you can't charge pet deposits. That is considered an emotional support animal, not a pet. And so in our leasing packages, will help guide you through that entire process.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm liking what I'm hearing with that, and there are some tools coming on. Have you heard of petscreener.com?
I actually, we looked at them also for partnership because I actually really like how they do it and what they do. And especially because emotional support animals are going like this, you
Yes.
see so many more being put in. I think it's a fantastic, fantastic solution.
All right. Do you have any plans to possibly integrate with them or do anything with them? Or
Yeah,
can you
we
not say?
we've yeah we've spoken about doing some sort of integration with them. There's always the question of, do you integrate or do you build it yourself, and what parts do you build, etc. And so that's actually been something that we're looking into. The first thing right now that we're doing has to do with like other parts of our accounting and our leases and stuff like that. So that's what our primary focus is, to help with that tenant placement process. But it's definitely something on the longer term roadmap.
Awesome. Sounds great. All right. So these self-guided tours, because I like the idea. Now, how far do you get into the process before you allow them to tour the property? Do you actually make them go through the whole entire like application, or is it just like you met the landlord's criteria and now we can give you a
Yeah,
self-guided tour? So is that
yeah,
where we're
good
at?
question.
Yeah.
So you have to fill it, get the objective criteria. We wouldn't ask you to do a full application. No one's going to do a
Okay.
full application before they
Yeah.
see it. It's just really, these are the criteria. Click yes or no. We haven't verified it yet. You just confirm that, and then obviously the security verification. The security verification is even more important. because the verification that you objectively meet the criteria of the property doesn't really waste the landlord's time if you go and do a self-guided tour and then you do the application and we deny you because you don't objectively meet the criteria of the landlord. But with the self-guided tour, that is definitely one where you want to make sure from a security perspective you have that verified driver's license and have scanned it for authentication, making sure it's the person in the photo, etc. So that's probably the most important part with the process.
Awesome. And we could talk on this topic all day long. So I do want to wrap this up here soon. So give me like one thing that you really see most landlords either skip over that's hurting them when placing a tenant.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that they skip over is actually once you have someone who's qualified, getting to know them slightly better. So this person you're going to have a 12-month relationship with. It's longer than some marriages last, right? You're going to have at least a 12-month relationship. You need more data points on this person. So whether it's a call that, from the leasing side or agents do or you do or whatever it may be, um you need to know this person, get in a bit more. You really need to understand how they work, how they operate, and are they going to, from that perspective, be the right person for the property. Let me give you an example, Paul, on that. If you meet with this person and you just go through this is the next process, et cetera, it's a 5-minute call that saves you a nightmare later on. And you start getting some kind of weird feelings, like they start asking you 5,000 questions of like, well, I saw there's like a little scratch in the wall. You're going to fix that for me, right? I saw this is going to be fixed as well. It's like, of course you want it move-in ready and spotless and clean, but you might want to, with the last landlord, be like, did they follow the lease? Like, were there any lease violations? Would you rent to them again? Those types of questions. And in some states you can ask, would you rent to them again? But you really want to make sure you have enough data to signal, is this person going to be a right fit for your property? And so that's where, especially if it's a 12-month rental, it's slightly different than an Airbnb, because an Airbnb, you get them out in a weekend. You're going to have this tenant for a long time. So a 5-minute quick understanding, making sure you and I are aligned, Paul, before you move in is very helpful. And I think the tenant appreciates that as well, to just make sure that there's very objective, clear, let's go through the lease. This is what you're responsible for. This is what I'm responsible for. This is when rent needs to be paid. There will be late fees if you don't pay on time. And if you get any sort of pushback or tenants being like, wait a second, oh, guests in the property, what do you mean I can't have a guest for longer? There's going to be a lot of things that trigger to say, is this the right fit for me? And so I think once you get to there, just if there's anything, sometimes you think something's a bit off, but you don't do anything about it. In that particular case, if you think something might be off, get to know them a bit more to make sure objectively both of you are on the same page.
Yeah, that's great. And everything else, as far as your criteria, I mean, Hemlane tells you, man, this is a conditional tenant or this is a red tenant. Like, don't place this tenant. And you
Yeah,
can still place them, but people do skip right over that. So,
totally.
yeah.
Totally.
I would say I really appreciate you coming on, and I like what Hemlane's offered me so far and helps me out. And it really does help. The more you can build your own network into Hemlane, the better it's going to be for you. So, as the, owner
Yeah.
of the property. Um,
Yeah. I'm so glad to hear that. That's what we want to do.
all right, Dana, thank you so much for coming on, and I will let you get back to your trip.
Great. Thanks so much, Paul, for having me.